Welcome to topic 7. This topic deals with ethics of blockchain. There are some ethical issues in blockchain which are very obvious. One of them is blockchain uses distributed ledger technology. Distributed ledger technology ensures that data is stored at multiple locations. Storage of data at multiple locations requires more storage capacity. Again, blockchain and distributed ledger technologies compress data to store it at multiple nodes. Still, if the same technology were used to store the data at one location, the amount of storage required would be quite less compared to what is currently provided by blockchain and underlying distributed ledger technologies. The second obvious ethical issue with blockchain is related to its most popular consensus algorithm, proof of work. Currently, proof of work algorithms are quite computation intensive. Computation intensive nature of proof of work algorithms leads to high energy usage. Though blockchain community is currently developing proof of stake consensus algorithms that will be less energy consuming. Beyond these two obvious issues, deployment of technology like blockchain and distributed ledger technologies requires extensive thinking on ethical issues. The primary reason for this is because blockchain technologies claim not only to transform databases, business applications, but also society, economy, and politics in general. Since blockchain will be such a transformative technology, we should take a look at its ethical issues in a very diligent and detailed manner. This paper tries to systematize the ethical issues in blockchain by dividing it into different promises that blockchain solution proposes. Blockchain solutions first promises its technology stack, which at micro level through its peer-to-peer computing, consensus algorithm, immutability of data, and public-private key pair authentication mechanisms has given rise to applications of distributed ledgers. Distributed ledgers provide various companies and individuals with shared ledger, collective consensus mechanisms, secure transaction records, as well as algorithmically ensured correctness of the data underlying there in the blocks. Anytime we talk about databases or collection of data from individuals or companies, we need to understand the ethical issues in 5 dimensions. The first dimension is privacy. Now, blockchain claims to be pseudo-anonymous or anonymous in nature. So the first ethical question to ask while developing or utilizing blockchain solution in a company is to what kind of information should be public in public blockchains and what kind of information should be private. Second question to ask with respect to privacy is how to share data that disallows its misuse. Immutability of blockchain databases is very inimical to certain privacy issues. For example, consider a situation where malicious elements or fringe elements of society steal private data and post it on a blockchain. Since blockchain provides immutability of data in its database, such private information would remain in public domain forever. Second aspect while dealing with database related technologies is about accuracy of data. Here, blockchain has certain positive aspects. Through its proof of work consensus algorithm, as well as immutable hashing and cryptographic based data technology, blockchain ensures that accurate data is stored. However, think of a scenario where some fringe elements carry out malicious transactions and wrongful transactions on a public blockchain. If miners or validators have validated that transaction, this wrongful transaction will again remain on the public domain for a long time because blockchain ensures immutability of data. So these aspects need to be considered in a very proper manner. Third aspects related to data is of property. Of course, in contrast to centralized systems where service providers store data from users centrally and misuse it, blockchain provides collective ownership of data. Not to say that collective ownership or public goods cannot be misused. So, what kind of data are stored and available to public needs to be thought through very properly while applying public blockchain solutions. This is one of the reasons public blockchain solutions are not popular in highly regulated industries such as banking sector. Fourth aspect to think about data issues in blockchain is about accessibility. Public accessibility has its benefits, especially on public blockchains. But as we know that certain regulatory conditions in banking and financial sector require data to be not accessible to other people. That's why private distributed ledger technologies have come in fashion, where they ensure that the data is only shared between parties or amongst parties that are involved in the transaction. Accessibility of public data has done some good for anti-money laundering authorities in countries who are investigating how drug traffickers or human traffickers or criminal gangs have used blockchain to transfer their money from one location to another and make it legal. Fourth aspect to think about blockchain technology and data is about equality. Why this issue comes up is we know that the core blockchain technologies are being developed by a handful of developers. Most of the developers are involved in developing services through which they could monetize their business models. The handful of developers who control the technological aspects of core blockchain technologies is a greater threat to ethics, because this, unlike the promise of decentralization that blockchain has, centralizes power in the hands of the few who could influence the trajectory of the technology, or some of them could also be involved in malicious acts. The second label on which ethical issues needs to be considered for blockchain are on the applications label. Again here, there are two categories. One is cryptocurrencies and all tokens, where Bitcoin, alternative cryptocurrencies, investment, exchange and payment products are, which claim that they provide digital cash and payment systems. Many ICO cases have turned out to be fraud. Since ICO market is not regulated, as we have seen in our previous modules, this has led to a lot of fraud cases where uninformed investors have invested in projects that were phony since the beginning, and the developers were not even willing to develop those projects. One of the most famous projects you could search on internet is about Crypto Queen. The other ethical issue related to cryptocurrency and tokens is about Ponzi scheme concerns. Ponzi scheme is a situation where a company asks investors to invest in the company, whereas the company actually does not have a business model to earn money. Then what company does is it takes money from new investors and pays to its old investor, thereby creating a scheme where it seems that the company is making money and returning money to its investors, but actually, since company is not adding value or creating money, it won't be able to pay all its investors in future. The third aspect that we should consider when we think about blockchain is about volatility and speculation. High volatility in the blockchain market Low regulation and speculation gives rise to gambling behavior. And many a time, uninformed people, people who are in the lower strata of socioeconomy and disillusioned with government, lose a lot of money. Another aspect with cryptocurrencies is, as we have discussed previously as well in this lecture, is about tax evasion, corruption, money laundering, and drug trafficking issues. Furthermore, cryptocurrencies, since they work in the unregulated realm, have also given rise to shadow economies where people buy drugs on internet by the use of Bitcoin, or human traffickers or criminal gangs pay their suppliers, distributors, and involved parties using blockchain. In this sense, blockchain creates a shadow economy and thus hampers the government's monetary policy and regulation of the economy. Definitely, blockchain could be useful in certain countries like Venezuela, where the volatility of the currency propounded by the government is even higher than the blockchain. But again, while we are developing blockchain-based solutions, we should be aware of them. The third aspect which I would like to cover is about smart contracts. As we have already seen in our previous module, that smart contracts digitize the rules of the contracts and its contents in the if-then-else model, and then we provide certain kind of external triggers to trigger these smart contracts. One of the benefits, I would say, of smart contracts could be reduced transaction fees, because as we have seen in the last lecture, if multiple parties could be brought to a platform, and the transaction timing and cost could be cut down by a huge amount of margin. Also, smart contracts simplify procedures. The biggest problem with simplified procedure on smart contracts is smart contracts are not legal contracts, and the contract laws were written not to deal with digital contracts. So perhaps in many markets and many regulatory national authorities needs to actually reconsider the legal issues with respect to blockchain and smart contracts. So in this way, smart contracts could give rise to a situation where the law is not able to handle the situation. Again, smart contracts have certain downsides as well. One of the downsides is smart contracts promote efficiency, which means that if a smart contract based solution come in vogue in industries, it will lead to a lot of worker layoff. Now again, in the transition period, worker layoff could lead to high rise in unemployment, and we all know that high rise in unemployment could lead to more crime because people need to feed their family and desperate situations demand desperate measures. Also, promotion of efficiency by blockchain could provide managers with an idea where they think that since automation works, the human employees in the transition period could be pushed to work harder and in inhuman condition. Autonomous models of blockchain smart contracts also have a lot of ethical dimensions. One of the most important ethical dimension here is the decision making is shifting or moving away from humans to machines. Now what happens if machines make wrong decisions? Smart contracts in collaboration with artificial intelligence, which are self-learning programs, could create situations where computers make mistakes and lead to disasters. So when machines make decisions and make decisions which are unethical in nature, who will be responsible for those ethical issues? The third way to consider ethical conditions on blockchain is their promise to transform society, politics, and economy. Blockchain basically provides a promise of decentralization, where it talks of elimination of intermediaries like financial institutions, elimination of even central banks, such as who control currency. It also talks about an underlying decentralization of trust and decentralization of knowledge. Such humongous decentralizations are propounded to lead to autonomous applications which execute codes by themselves, autonomous organizations where the contract between employee and organizations is changed, autonomous corporations where a lot of tasks which could be automated are carried out by smart contracts and computers and robots other than by humans, and also autonomous society where blockchain is used for voting purposes, because blockchain can, as we have seen in previous modules, run identity-based solutions. We could identify and vote. Now, there are a lot of ethical impacts of this great transformation that blockchain promises. First of all, the promise of decentralization that blockchain promises is not at all true, as we have already seen that the core technologies of blockchain are developed by a handful of developers. The technology does not promise real decentralization. Another example where decentralization has failed in blockchain is about mining community, where miners have pooled resources, especially on Bitcoin, and now we could see that 3 of the top miners in China control more than 51% of computational power. This could or might lead to hazardous situations. So we have to be careful when we understand, and we have to be critical when we think about the promises that blockchain technology makes and the ground realities that it delivers. Again, as we have touched upon, blockchain talks about a technological utopia where no regulation will be required and kind of anarchism and order will thrive in society in tandem. But such technological utopias may not come true in very near future. And before we analyze the promises and technological utopia that blockchain promises, we should be careful and critically analyze how the society will change. The example comes from artificial intelligence and spread of information technology. Information technology also promised that information will be freely available. But the way the technology has been deployed, we see a lot of fissures in the promise that technology promised in its early years. For example, we can see that targeted ads and news leads to people confirming their biases, thereby more polarization in society. So before we deploy blockchain, we should think about all these issues. Again, we cannot think and anticipate all the issues in advance, so the best way to deal with such issues is to lay down different steps and stages of transformation and carry those transformations in a simpler manner. The third aspect that I would like to cover in this course is about digital democratization that blockchain promises. Again, if we think about how digital democratization could be used in current political systems, we have to understand that democracy not only runs on simple yes or no or maybe voting systems, but democracy runs with deliberations where facts are presented to users and then users make informed decisions on whether they support a proposal or not. Again, as we have seen with the rise of internet technology and fake news on internet, there might be an opportunity that we need to reconsider how we are implementing the parts of deliberations in democracy. So while blockchain may facilitate voting rights and other conditions, we should also think about how blockchain may make deliberations more fruitful, how blockchain may be used to actually counter polarization in society.